April 12th edition of Back Roads of Illinois with Cesar Delgado. We were Central Illinois agriculture source and in the Midwest alongside in Central Illinois agriculture. I visited Mike North yesterday's show about the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate report from the Department of Agriculture. We talked about that. Those report is pretty bearish or neutral for yesterday. Of course, we watched the beans markets after the close. It was pretty disappointing numbers in the markets. This is your agricultural news on today's program. Beginning with the World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimate report from the Department of Agriculture. The corn stock is 211 bushel per acre. Soybean cry out is 342 and the beans cry out. Otherwise, we are watching for the weather models in the Midwest alongside in Dakotas. This weekend is going to be warmer weather for next week in central Illinois, but there are getting some storms for next week. There are some farmers are planting soybeans in central Illinois near Peoria between Champaign. We were going to be on pace to planting in central Illinois and Midwest. This is your agricultural news on Back Roads of Illinois. We were hearing from Josh Linville from Stonex and Fertilizer Division out of Kansas City.
Recorded this actually a couple times, and when I go back to get it all put together, it's been broken apart in pieces. So part of the fun of traveling internationally. So lots of stuff in the markets here of late. One of the first questions you had, of course, and this has been on the forefront of a lot of folks' minds in the Northeast of the U.S. is what's going on with this Baltimore Bridge situation? Obviously, devastating news that that ship crashed into the pier, dropped the entire bridge. And while we, of course, need to be focused on the loss of life, that was absolutely tragic. Very quickly, we start turning to the economic side. And from a personal standpoint, I start thinking about it from a fertilizer standpoint. And unfortunately, this is a major UAN receiving port, and this is disruptive. Even during any part of the year, this would be a disruptive event. The fact that it's happening right before the start of spring season, this could be on the verge of devastating. Now, on the fortunate side, silver lining, we have already started to hear that shallow draft vessels are being able to make their way through. A lot of cleanup is going on. Obviously, the government around there and everybody understands how important these shipping channels are, especially this time of year. So they're really going into overdrive trying to get this stuff cleaned up and make more ships can go through. So being able to see these shallow draft ships come through is a very, very promising sign. But UAN and fertilizer vessels are not shallow draft. These are going to be a little bit deeper. And there's still a lot of question as far as will they be able to get through? When will they be able to get through? What are the secondary alternatives? And that's really what everybody's trying to figure out. And this is one of the situations everybody's kind of reaching out to me and saying, well, what do we do if we're in this area? And I can tell you, talk with your supplier. Talk with that person who has storage. They are the ones that are bringing in the vessels. They have the best story for you as far as what they're expecting, what they think will happen, what they don't think will happen. Now, from a global standpoint, this is a blip on the radar. It doesn't change the S&D because we didn't lose any product. These vessels are probably going to, if they cannot reach their way to Baltimore, they're going to start trying to find other ports along the eastern seaboard, or they'll go to the Gulf of Mexico trying to go up the river system. They'll try and find a secondary logistical route to make their way to that marketplace. So while this is a blip on the radar as far as the global UAN marketplace goes, this could be devastating for the local region. So again, these farmers probably need to be having a lot more conversation with the retailers. Retailers need to be talking with their supplier to get an idea of where are we in progress. Stay very in tune with them. They're going to fill you in on what they can or cannot do. They want this thing to work just as much as everybody else does because they don't want to be sitting on this product at the end of spring. The second question you had was pricing for fertilizer in the Midwest. And we are actually in the process right now of wrapping up 3 of the products, phosphate, potash, and anhydrous. Pre-plant is largely done for the majority of the U.S. marketplace. Farmers are turning their attention away from application and towards actually planting their crops. So it's going to be that time. And so those values are kind of going to the wayside. There's still going to be pockets of demand out there. And I'm not acting like there isn't. Anhydrous, of course, has got some northern demand still in front. Eastern Corn Belt's got some side dress demand. But I believe what we're going to start to see now is that values will start to kind of trend lower as we start moving into those quiet summer months. Those three products are looking at a very, very long winter. Summer. We had a very short winter, wrapped up the fall, middle of December. We started in a lot of spots in the middle of February. That was not enough time to refill the coffers and get prepared for the spring run. So we've been playing from time on those three products. Now, urea and UAN, these are the two that are still in front of us. A lot of demand out there, a lot of applications still to be done. And it's a tale of two products. On the one hand, UAN is continuing to hold very high prices. This is because inventories are incredibly tight across North America. Some of them we saw coming, some of them surprised us as far as why we're where we are. One of the biggest things as far as why we're so tight on inventories, we started this fertilizer back on July 1st, 2023, very low on inventories. We had a great last spring. We emptied the system. We just didn't have much left when we finished out last spring. Number two, we saw a little bit of this, but not all of it. So number two is our import-export differential. We didn't gain very much. Almost every ton that we've imported to the U.S. market, we've exported right back out again. So we've not been able to really gain a foothold as far as imports coming in to help resupply what we haven't had here in place. And the third, this is what kind of shocked us. We had anticipated some production downturn. We expected problems. We expected turnarounds, repairs, things like that. They just happened as part of the nitrogen production process. But some of these plants that went down for repairs stayed down much longer than they expected. And then the cold winter snap that we had this winter affected production as well. Some estimates are that we could have lost between 1 and 1.5 million tons of UAN production this winter for the entirety of North America. So these are three very lethal issues that have all come together to make the UAN market very tight. And a tightly supplied market, prices hold higher. On the flip side, we've got urea. This week, India shocked the urea world to its core. They were lined up to purchase about, I think it was 760,000 tons. I'm going off memory here, so sorry for my exact. I believe it's 760,000 tons. That's how we left last week. That's how we closed out the day on Friday. Monday morning, we woke up to the news and India said, we don't need that much. We're only going to purchase 340,000 tons. And values have been falling all over the place. We're seeing it in the Gulf of Mexico. We're seeing a lot of production points around the world. Farmers are going to be a little irritated because they're not seeing it immediately there at home. But we also have to remember it takes a while for these numbers to work their way through the system. Take, for example, a ton produced in the Arab Gulf. Yes, today price ideas there are cheaper, but it takes 30 days for that Arab Gulf ship or ton to be loaded, sail its way over here, unloaded into the Gulf of Mexico, for example. And then it takes another 30 days to get that up into the system to a retail location and out to the farm gate. So it does take time for these things to process through. A lot of signs that prices are going to be falling. It's just a matter of how big and how quickly before the end of spring season. Freight and basis continues to be much, much wider. And a lot of this has to do with inventories being so tight. Everybody has taken a just-in-time demand model leading into the spring. Well, everybody's probably a strong word, but a lot of folks have taken a just-in-time demand approach to the season. Well, that's fine. That's great. We get to hold on and hopefully you see some cheaper prices. But unfortunately, you wait too long and you start to meet just-in-time logistics. And that's what we're running into. Forest river systems are doing much, much better than what we've seen in the last year and a half, 2 years. That's been a beneficial situation. Rail, unfortunately, can only do what rail can normally do. And trucks is something, it just continues to lose more and more truckers to other industries that keep them home at night and frankly pay them more money. So logistics have really spiked this year, this spring season. We're seeing a lot of inland values significantly higher versus that Gulf of Mexico than what we would normally see this time of year. You'd asked about the Israel war impact. Obviously, this is something that continues to go back and forth. This last weekend, Israel had started pulling out a lot of their divisions out of Gaza. They're leaving one. There's a lot of speculation. Is this the end of the war, the retaliation, or is this just kind of rearming and getting ready for wave 2? We don't know. Obviously, that whole situation there, it has the potential to destabilize the entirety of the Middle East region. And that's what worries us. Now, potash is the Israel is the fourth largest potash exporter in the world. So we do need to watch that from a direct standpoint. If there's an attack on their potash operations, that could be hurtful for the potash values. We could see bullish situations pop up on potash. But it's the nitrogen that we're really worried about. It's the escalation in the region, not just Israel, Gaza, not just Israel, Hamas. It's what if Iran starts to play a part? When you look at it, North Africa and the Middle East combined account for 1 out of every 2 tons of urea nitrogen exported around the world. And go back to the Gulf War with Iraq. There's tons and tons of news reports, and everybody's talking about how difficult it is to move vessels with the threat of Iraqi attacks. Well, Iraq only had a very narrow seaboard on the northern end of the Persian Gulf. Look at Iran as an example. They dominate the entirety of the eastern seaboard of that Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. So if something were to happen, Iran says, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm getting into a fight with the West. They could start to attack vessels up and down that shipping lane. And because they control the entirety of the eastern side of it, it is much easier for this to be a major impact. We are talking literally tens of millions of tons that are exported from that Gulf of Mexico every single year on an annual basis. So this is what we're really watching for. The Red Sea attacks, that was impactful. It was something that disrupted, but there were alternatives. If something happened, all of a sudden we can't ship in the Persian Gulf, there's not a secondary route. Now we're having big troubles, and it's very hard to figure out what the price looks like on the flip side. And finally, you ask, what's my advice to the farmers? Unfortunately, we're now to the time of the year where we're kind of backed into a corner. There's very little time to work with. Spring is right here. We're planting. Nitrogen demand is right here in front of us. So right now, the best thing I can tell farmers is to continue talking to your retailer and talk to them. How are supplies? How are you sitting on storage? Do you have enough? Do we need to be talking about what I need when I need it so you can make preparations? So that's unfortunately where we are today. I will say going into the summer, and we're already starting to see some of these situations popping up. I'm a very big advocate. If you are going to go buy fertilizer, we should be looking at selling grain. From my vantage point, farming is just all about inputs, outputs. And I know it's a very simplistic way, and that's not all of farming. I fully understand that, and I appreciate it. But when you're marketing, that's all it's about. It's about the input output value. And that's why we look at it from a ratio standpoint, trying to figure out how many bushels of corn or bean or whatever it is that we're spending to pay off for that ton of fertilizer. We want to look for the lowest ratio we can. So as we start to look forward, a lot of folks are always sitting there saying, well, gosh darn it, I don't want to buy my fertilizer because what if grain falls? Or I don't want to sell my grain because what if fertilizer rises? Let's look at trying to partner these up and look at these. These numbers are things that your retailer should have at their disposal. In this, the formula is nothing more than just take your price of fertilizer, divide it by that price of grain, and that's your ratio. And run that back several years. You'll very quickly start to figure out what's considered low, what's considered decent, what's considered high. We get to those low numbers. I understand we always want to buy the low of the fert and the high or sell the high of the grain. Very rare we ever get to do that, but we can very quickly figure out where the low of that value is and lock that in. So it's a very powerful tool that we've been trying here for a couple of years, trying to teach the marketplace. We got a long road ahead of us, but we believe in it. I figure I've got about 20 years left of my career. This is what I'm going to spend my entire 20 years talking about. So Caesar, again, I appreciate you having me on. So I could be live there with you, just traveling all over the place, get to go home, see the family tomorrow. So appreciate it, sir. If you need anything else, please let me know. Thanks a lot.
Thanks to Josh Linville bringing in. Welcome back to the show on Back Roads of Illinois. We're glad you're here. I will be in Champaign for a meeting with Dr. Temple Grandin. I am looking forward. We were talking with Ted Ness from Zenner Hedges and Jason Minter and Mac Marshall from the United Soybeans Board. I will invite you on next Friday morning at 10 on Zoom with us. Well, folks, there's our show on Back Roads of Illinois. For Back Roads of Illinois, I am Cesar Delgado. Have a good weekend.